A diode emits amber light. The retina receives the photon. Cortical pathways process panic. The dashboard reads P0420. You perceive a mechanical death. You believe the system is terminal. The system is merely suffocating. Last Tuesday, the diagnostic scanner delivered a mathematical verdict. Catalytic converter failure. The financial calculus was immediate. $1,900 at the secondary repair facility. $3,400 at the primary dealership. The technician stated a definitive end. He stated the internal architecture was incinerated. He stated the precious transitional metals were consumed by thermal decay. He demanded a total architectural replacement. He did not lie. Deception requires intent. He simply lacked molecular vision. Consider a 72-year-old retired industrial chemist. A man who formulated molecular solvents for heavy commercial applications for 31 years. He operated on a plane of pure molecular interaction. A Wednesday afternoon, the year 2019, a concrete fueling station. He observed the diagnostic panic. He offered a thermodynamic truth. The active compound in every retail catalytic restorative fluid costs precisely $1 per treatment. It rests in bulk on the steel shelf of every hardware repository in the nation. He dictated the physical parameters. Introduce the solvent to 25% volumetric capacity of gasoline. Initiate high-velocity highway transit for 30 uninterrupted minutes. The diagnostic code vanishes within one single consumption cycle. Before we manipulate the chemical inputs, we must dissect the internal respiratory tract of the machine. The public perceives the converter as a dense void, a black box. It fractures. It is discarded. This is a cognitive failure. Beneath the steel housing lies a ceramic monolith, a precisely engineered geometric honeycomb. Thousands of microscopic parallel arteries. These arteries are plated with platinum, with palladium, with rhodium. These transitional metals are the thermodynamic engines of the exhaust system. They capture kinetic thermal energy. They force toxic molecular arrangements to restructure into harmless carbon dioxide and water vapor. They breathe for the machine. When this mechanical lung fails, the precious metals are rarely incinerated. Total thermal degradation is a statistical outlier. The dominant pathology is compounding entropy. It is the physics of incomplete combustion. Unburned hydrocarbon chains exit the firing cylinder. They cool. They condense into solid carbon structures. This is the physiological cost of internal combustion. 1,000 miles of carbon accretion, 10,000 miles of carbon accretion, 50,000 miles of carbon accretion, 100,000 miles of carbon accretion. The arteries narrow. The soot binds tightly to the ceramic substrate. The platinum is buried. The palladium is smothered. The flow of kinetic exhaust chokes against its own necrotic tissue. The metals are not dead. They are entirely intact. They are simply entombed beneath the carbon. The engine registers the thermodynamic resistance. It compensates. It forces an unnecessarily rich fuel mixture. The downstream oxygen sensors detect atmospheric hypoxia. The electronic control unit translates the dropping voltage into an algorithmic verdict. 420. The mechanic observes the diode. The mechanic quotes a $3,000 replacement. What the technician does not communicate is a structural reality. If the ceramic skeleton is uncracked, if the honeycomb is physically rigid, if the platinum remains locked beneath the plaque, you do not possess a dead catalytic converter. You possess a contaminated one. Contamination demands chemical dissolution. This was the chemist's exact domain. My vehicle sat immobile at the fuel pump. A failed emissions diagnostic fresh in the cabin. He approached. He heard the financial panic. He identified the chemical key. Propanone, pure acetone. Not a blended commercial liquid. Not a proprietary retail automotive formula. Pure structural propanone from the industrial solvent aisle. $8 for a rigid quart vessel of paint thinner. He dictated the geometry of the cure. 1 quart of propanone. A quarter tank of unrefined octane. 30 minutes of sustained kinetic load. He presented a physical ledger from the cab of his truck. A spiral-bound sequence of empirical data. 11 years of strict observation. 19 discrete vehicle architectures. 14 permanent eradications of the P0420 code. Exact mileage input. Exact mileage output. fuel efficiency differentials documented before and after the chemical event. This was not a hypothesis. This was a lifetime of molecular mastery. An industrial chemist deciding that the knowledge of his existence was worth transferring to any human who would simply observe the physics. The mechanism of action is strict thermodynamics. Why does industrial propanone execute the identical function of a $30 retail catalytic fluid? Because they are the same physical compound. The chemical safety sheets for premium automotive solvents dictate the contents. Acetone, isopropanol, petroleum distillates, xylene. The primary reactive agent is the acetone. When propanone enters the fuel reservoir, it achieves uniform suspension within the gasoline. The fuel pump injects the mixture directly into the combustion chamber. Here is the violent physics of the mechanism. Propanone resists total vaporization during the localized explosion of the compression stroke. A calculated fraction survives the thermal event. It escapes the cylinder as a high-energy volatile gas. This vapor is propelled forcefully through the exhaust manifold, down the steel pipe, directly into the ceramic honeycomb of the converter. Inside this high-heat crucible, the acetone vapor becomes a solvent hammer. It carries kinetic chemical energy. It attacks the rigid bonds anchoring the solid carbon soot to the ceramic walls. The chemical bonds fracture. The carbon oxidizes rapidly. It transforms from a solid mass into a volatile gas. The necrotic tissue is expelled from the exhaust tip. The microscopic arteries clear. The platinum and palladium are instantly exposed to the raw exhaust stream. The catalytic reaction restarts. The downstream oxygen sensors register normalized atmospheric flow. The electronic control unit extinguishes the P0420 code. The speed of this restoration relies on the nature of the attack. You are not utilizing mechanical abrasion. You are executing chemical dissolution. It is the distinction between fracturing ice with a steel sledgehammer and applying a sodium chloride solution. One relies on brute kinetic energy. The other leverages the elegant, effortless rules of molecular bonds. The automotive industrial complex mapped this chemistry decades ago. Examine every premium catalytic restoration product on the retail shelf. The dominant active solvent is acetone or a structurally adjacent hydrocarbon. The variation between a $20 bottle at an auto parts franchise and an $8 can at the hardware store is a manipulation of human psychology. It is plastic packaging and targeted typography. The auto parts bottle is labeled catalytic converter cleaner. The hardware store tin is labeled paint thinner. The molecular structure within both vessels is virtually identical. One is marketed as an automotive specialty chemical with an aggressive margin. The other is a utility solvent for industrial laborers. No participant in the automotive supply chain will hand you industrial paint thinner to correct a $3,000 mechanical error. The economic void between the retail product and its underlying chemistry is where the profit margin breathes. Enter any auto parts store. Walk to the additive aisle. Reverse any brightly colored plastic bottle. Scrutinize the microscopic print of the safety data sheet. Acetone, isopropanol, xylene, light petroleum distillates. These are fundamental solvents. The branded fluid is merely a blended cocktail, aggressively marketed. The financial extraction ranges from $20 to $60 for a single chemical event. A rigid quart of pure acetone is $8. 1 quart treats 2 separate tanks at the precise ratio. Purchase a half-pint tin, and the financial output drops to a single dollar. Why does the primary automotive industry bury this mechanism? The architecture of suppression is twofold. First, the regulatory mandate. The environmental protection agencies force a rigid bureaucratic sequence before a mechanic can legally replace a catalytic converter. The client signs the document. The technician signs the document. The mechanical failure is recorded. Financial penalties exist for deviation. Crucially, there is zero regulatory friction encouraging chemical restoration prior to component replacement. There is no systemic mandate to execute a $1 chemical flush. The documentation burden is attached solely to the $3,000 hardware replacement, and that burden is seamlessly integrated into the shop's operational flow. The bureaucratic labor consumes 4 minutes. The profit margin on the replacement hardware is hundreds of dollars above wholesale cost. The industrial acetone flush generates zero revenue for the mechanic. The structure is cold and predictable. The scanner reads P0420. The training demands hardware replacement. The mechanic extracts revenue. The client payee. No biological entity in that transaction possesses a financial incentive to hand you a can of paint thinner. Second, the additive manufacturers, the corporations bottling branded converter cleaners, thrive entirely on obscuring their chemical reality. If the consumer mass realized the active agent was an industrial utility solvent available for pennies, the entire specialty chemical market would instantly evaporate. They cannot disclose that acetone is the mechanism. They deploy proprietary vocabulary. They obscure the contents behind trade names and automotive-specific marketing. They construct the illusion of a highly sophisticated, uniquely engineered compound. It is a utility solvent inside a bottle decorated with an illustration of a tailpipe. There is a historical record. In 1986, when operational guidelines for aftermarket catalytic converter replacement were formalized, the technical review included testimony from chemical engineers at 3 dominant petrochemical conglomerates. This testimony is embedded in the public archives. 2 of those 3 entities openly admitted that standard industrial solvents effectively dissolved rigid carbon deposits on ceramic catalyst substrates. The government recorded the finding. The practical application of that finding was entirely ignored in the final legislation. The regulation crystallized around the mechanics of replacement and the bureaucracy of documentation. Chemical restoration was deemed irrelevant. The testifying engineers understood the physics. The regulatory body prioritized the financial interests lobbying for dominance. The hardware replacement market. This was not a shadowed conspiracy. It was the natural, silent outcome of financial momentum dictating which truths are amplified and which are relegated to the technical appendix. The entities profiting from physical replacement authored the rules governing replacement. Before you submit to the financial extraction, interrupt the sequence. A human observes a digital warning. A human walks to a retail parts counter. A human surrenders thousands of dollars. It is a biological reflex born of mechanical ignorance. Has any entity actually looked inside the steel cylinder? Not with an electronic code scanner. Not with a digital algorithm. With a micro-optical lens. With a fiber optic borescope. This physical inspection requires exactly 600 seconds. 10 minutes of optical verification. A mechanic who calculates a replacement cost without performing a micro-optical inspection is not diagnosing an engine. That mechanic is processing an invoice. The visual distinction is absolute. A carbon-choked respiratory tract will respond to propanone. A thermally fractured ceramic skeleton is dead. A melted honeycomb matrix is dead. They demand total physical extraction. Demand optical proof before financial surrender. If the algorithmic panic is currently flashing on your dashboard, if the P0420 code is active, execute the exact molecular protocol. Procure pure propanone. Enter the industrial solvent sector of any hardware repository. Locate a sealed metal cylinder. Do not purchase pharmaceutical cosmetics. Do not purchase nail polish remover. Pharmaceutical variations are contaminated with water molecules. They are diluted with synthetic conditioning agents. Procure the industrial standard. Pure paint-grade acetone. Manipulate your vehicle's fuel reservoir. Lower the fluid volume to exactly 25% capacity. This volumetric ratio is mathematically critical. The solvent concentration must remain lethal to the carbon bonds. Inject exactly 1 quart of pure propanone into the reservoir. Now replenish the unrefined gasoline. Halt when the analog gauge registers 50% capacity. Do not fill the reservoir completely. Excessive fluid dilution neutralizes the molecular hammer. A diluted solvent is a useless solvent. Now, induce violent kinetic load. Do not idle the engine. Do not navigate slow urban grids. The catalytic architecture must achieve massive operating temperatures. The physical mechanism demands extreme heat. Accelerate the machine to 60 miles per hour. Accelerate to 70 miles per hour. Sustain this velocity. 30 continuous minutes. No deceleration. No intersection stops. The internal core temperature of the ceramic honeycomb will exceed 600 degrees Fahrenheit. This extreme thermal state, combined with the vaporized propanone, this is the trigger. This activates the violent chemical dissolution. Idling in a static position is a thermodynamic failure. A 10-minute transit is a thermodynamic failure. Sustained thermal load at high velocity is the absolute requirement. Consume the fuel down to the 25% threshold. Replenish with standard unrefined octane. The necrotic carbon deposits are expelled. The algorithmic panic ceases. The digital code vanishes within a single thermal cycle. The physical ledger documented the extremes. 3 maximum chemical treatments. That was the ceiling for the most severely suffocated engines. Human anxiety will generate 3 primary concerns. Address the physics of these fears. Fear 1. The degradation of synthetic polymers. The fuel pump seals. The plastic architecture within the fuel delivery system, at the prescribed ratio of 1 quart propanone to 6 gallons of gasoline, the volumetric concentration peaks at 3.8%. The contact duration is microscopically brief. The fluid dilution is massively protective. Molecular degradation of these elastomers is physically impossible at this concentration. 2 decades of digital automotive archives validate this physical truth. Documented structural failures at 3% concentration do not exist. If your synthetic seals are actively disintegrating from age, avoid all chemical injections. Avoid the $30 retail cocktails. Fear 2. The oxygen sensors. The combustion of propanone yields identical byproducts to the combustion of gasoline. Carbon dioxide, water vapor. The oxygen sensors process these exhaust gases normally. The premium retail converter fluids contain identical propanone volumes. They display 0 hazard warnings regarding oxygen sensor degradation. The physical risk is a phantom. Fear 3. The fatal mechanical condition. The melted core. If the internal combustion sequence operated in a severely rich state for thousands of hours, if the ceramic honeycomb physically fractured, if the structure liquefied under an extreme thermal event, no molecular solvent will resurrect it. A shattered skeleton requires extraction. Propanone dissolves carbon bonds. Propanone does not reconstruct melted ceramic architecture. Understanding this physical boundary before sacrificing your capital is the paramount directive. Observe the physics applied to a heavy pickup truck operated by a farmer cultivating 600 acres of biological mass. A 58-year-old human who has disassembled and reconstructed heavy machinery since his 12th year of existence. The truck triggered the P0420 digital warning. 212,000 miles of kinetic wear. 3 independent repair facilities analyzed the parameters. 3 technicians condemned the catalytic architecture. They calculated an extraction of capital between $1,400 and $2,200. The temporal timing was financially disastrous. He rejected the financial extraction. He located the propanone protocol within a digital archive. He executed the chemical strike. He applied brutal kinetic load on a state highway. 40 sustained minutes of thermal velocity. The algorithmic code evaporated from the matrix on the primary fuel cycle. 14 months of planetary rotation have elapsed. The digital warning remains extinguished. He executed a secondary chemical strike at 225,000 miles, a preventative molecular strike against compounding entropy. The mechanical respiratory system functions flawlessly. Total financial output, $3. He informed the secondary technician of the chemical victory. The service advisor stared blankly. The service advisor possessed 0 awareness of this molecular mechanism. He felt no surprise. This sequence of events is not a biological miracle. It is not an anomaly. It is a deeply ordinary thermodynamic outcome. Across digital forums, across fragmented digital archives, this exact physical reality repeats. Different human operators, different geographic coordinates, different vehicle architectures. The identical chemical result. The data has existed in the digital ether for over 20 years. It surfaces periodically. It sinks. It becomes obfuscated when humans deploy incorrect chemical formulas like lacquer thinner. The formulation of lacquer thinner mutated over the decades. The results fractured. Pure propanone cuts through the confusion. Propanone executes the mechanical violence. It rests in thousands of hardware repositories. It costs absolute fractions of a dollar. The average mechanical replacement extracts between $900 and $4,000 from the human operator. The financial current flowing through this industrial replacement pipeline every year is mathematically massive. The knowledge of the $1 solution is buried under digital algorithms. The search engines prioritize hardware replacement indices. The search engines prioritize $50 retail cocktails. This is not a malicious human conspiracy. This is not a shadowed room of architects. It is the cold, silent structure of capital. The cheap chemical restoration produces zero capital. The expensive hardware replacement produces infinite capital. The mechanic who condemns your converter is not deceiving you. He simply learned diagnostics within a mechanical matrix where catalytic architectures are replacement items. Chemical restoration was erased from the curriculum. The knowledge was never stolen from you. It simply failed to propagate to the biological units who required it. Now it is yours. Walk to your vehicle. Open the heavy steel door. Sit on the rigid seat. 5 minutes. Feel the absolute stillness of the architecture. The machine is not a mystery. It is a physical certainty governed by unyielding laws. You perceive a mechanical death. You believe the system is terminal. The system is merely suffocating.